We're on DAF Mem Dalet Amid Aleph, Tanu Rabbanan. We're talking about, the Mishnah is talking about under what circumstances does an Eved go free. This is a Takanas Chachamim, that the Chachamim penalized a person who owns a slave, who does certain things. Either if he sells him to a Gentile, the rabbis say, you must free that slave now. You must write him a get shichur. The Eved automatically goes free. And the reason why is because you are being mafkia mitzvahs from that Eved. You are depriving that Eved Kanani the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvahs that an Eved Kanani is obligated to fulfill, which is the same scope as a Jewish woman. And because you've put him in that position that he can no longer fulfill mitzvahs, we penalize you and require you to free him, so that even if you could retrieve him back from the Gentile, he would have to go free. The other thing is that if you sell him to another Jew in Chutz La'aretz, the Eved has to go free as well. So let's take a look. The Gemara is going to analyze these things.
Sorry, Rabbi. When Goy Mishachrer is Goy free, if Goy don't want him.
Well, it seems that regardless, Rashi says, Im borach min ha'oved kol chavim. If he flees, if he runs away from the Oved Kochavim, so then he goes free. Now, another explanation is, Rashi says, O shekansuhu based in lifdoso kida amar lekaman. We're going to see that Bastin is going to require you to redeem him, right? And ucheshiyivdenu lo yishtabid lo. And then when you do redeem him, we don't allow you to treat him as a slave anymore, and you have to write him a get shichur. Those are the two explanations in Rashi on the Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanan, Giva'o b'chovo o shelakcho sikrikon lo yetzei lacherus. The Rabbi says that if a Gentile collects the Eved Kanani from a Jew as a collection of debt, which means that the Eved Kanani was not part of a deal or of a sale, but the Jew was a debtor, and he owed $1,000 to the Goy, and he didn't have money. So basically, all of the assets of the Jew can be collected as part of the debt. So the Gentile collects the Eved Kanani as the debt. In that situation, the Eved does not go free. Notice there's no penalty to the Jewish owner, because this is different from just outright selling him. This is sort of like the Jew's hands are tied. What was he supposed to do? O shalachcho sikrikon. Or what happens in a situation where there's religious persecution? Jews are being slaughtered willy-nilly right and left. And the only way for a Jew to save himself is to offer his assets to the authorities in order to for protexia. And he offers his Eved Kanani as protection, as an asset. In that situation there too, if he's able to retrieve the Eved does not go free. So the Gemara now says, Uvechovo lo, you mean to tell me if the Eved is a payment for a debt, he does not go free? Or a minhi, let's raise a contradiction. Haresha anaso beis hamelech gorno, im bechovo chayav la'aser, im be'an parus patur mila'aser. There's a brisa that says that if a person had his property seized by the king, and generally the way it would work is the king says, eminent domain, I hereby take possession of your property, but you can continue working it as a sharecropper on my property, the king says. Now in that situation, if the land is in Eretz Yisrael, if property is truly owned by a Gentile, so then it's patur from Trumas and Maisros. But in this situation, because the king has merely seized the property through eminent domain and allowed the Jew to continue working it, we still require the Jew to take Trumas and Maisros.
Is that Jewish king doing this?
No. It's a Gentile king.
In Israel?
In Israel, sure. There were plenty of times where there were Gentile kings, Romans, Persians, and so forth. Im be'an paros, if, however, you pay back the... now, Rashi just says that the word anparos is to deflect payment from the government. So basically what you do is you just you basically try to pay off a debt, so then it automatically becomes the property of the government that you're paying your taxes to or your debt to, and then it no longer belongs to you, and you're going to be exempt from tithing. So the Gemara says, well, I mean, really the question of the Gemara is that what you see from here is that we do consider the property to be forfeited. We consider the property to be forfeited because you're paying it back as a debt. If, let's say, you owe taxes or you owe a debt to the government and you pay back your land with it, so that land is considered to be transferred over to the government. Why then over here, when you're paying back your Eved as a debt, do we say that the Eved, you still retain ownership of the Eved and you can continue working him? Whereas in the case of property, we say that no, you forfeit the property to the government and the property now is therefore no longer subject to tithes. The Gemara answers, Shaini Hasam de Kamishtar Shilei. The Gemara says that it's different over there because you're benefiting from the payment to the government. And like Rashi says, he says, in that situation, he says, you're benefiting from them because you're paying back a debt. He says, therefore, when it comes to tithes, you're going to be liable in a case where the king seizes it as like Rashi says. Let me just modify the explanation. If you're paying back a debt to the king, then you still have to tithe. If you're just saving your life from loss, in other words, the government's going to harm you unless you forfeit something, so then you're going to be patur from giving meiser. So why is it that when you're paying back a debt to the king, we still say that you are liable to tithe, whereas by the Eved, why do we penalize you and we say that you're doing something, that you're not doing anything wrong? So it seems like there's a double standard. When it comes to property, we require you to tithe it because we sort of penalize you by saying that since you're paying your debt with real estate that you're not supposed to sell to a Gentile, we penalize you and we require you to continue tithing. When it comes to the Eved, we don't penalize you. We don't make you forfeit the Eved because you're coerced. Why is it different? So the Gemara says, Shaini Hasam de Kamishtar Shilei. The Gemara answers that when it comes to Meiser, that you're actually benefiting because you're no longer indebted to the government. But when it comes to an Eved, there's no reason to penalize you because you had no other choice. In other words, there's two different standards. As far as the requirement to continue tithing, we do require you to continue tithing because you're benefiting in the sense that you now have been relieved of debt. Since you're benefiting, it rises to the level of, okay, since you've benefited from it, we still require you to continue tithing because to some level you've benefited from forfeiting your land to a Gentile. So the penalty is we require you to continue tithing. However, like Rashi says, he says, but when it comes to an Eved, the only time the Chazal imposed this penalty is when you actually sell it. Not just because you're benefiting from this Eved going to a Gentile. And therefore, since you didn't willfully sell the Eved, we therefore don't penalize you. That's the chiluk.
So, perhaps another way of saying is that if the person didn't have it confiscated in honor of his debt, he would have kept it, but he would have been minus the meiser anyways. So what is his net loss? His net loss is really the amount minus the meiser, and perhaps that's the reason why he still has to give the meiser, is because his benefit was really only the amount.
Interesting. That's an interesting way to look at it, right? Because you're holding up the meiser in lieu of the forfeiture of the field. Okay. All right. Good. Tashma. The Amar Rav Hamocher Avdul Par Hanag Ove Kochavim Yetze Lacherus. Let's look at the next brisa, or not really a brisa. Rav says that if a person sells his Eved to a Par Hanag, Rashi says that Par Hanag, it's probably a Persian word. It's a meitzik. It's someone who's a person who is a persecutor, and he places some kind of libel upon a person to make him liable to the government to pay a certain amount. Sort of like the sheriff of Nottingham, where he says, I'm assessing you a certain tax that I think that you owe. And in order to be able to get him off your back, you say, you know what, in lieu of that tax that you want to assess to me, I will give you my eved. So so over there, the eved goes free. Now the question is, why should that be in light of the fact that we just said that if you are giving up your eved under duress because of the king's seizure of a debt, then you don't have to let the eved go free. The Gemara answer is Hasam Havale Lafayes Velo Pies. The answer is because in that case you had other ways of appeasing the sheriff. You could have paid him with other assets, and you chose to pay him with your eved. That's why we penalize you, so that we require you to free the eved. But over in the previous case, where there was nothing left for the person to pay, his only asset was the eved, that's why we don't penalize you. Gufa Amar Rav Hamocher Abdul Parhanago v'Kochavim Yetze Lacherus Mai Havale Lamevad Havale Lafayes Velo Pies. And this actually is fleshed out in the full statement of Rav, that if you sell your eved to a parhanag, this sort of like a sheriff who collects taxes unfairly, if you give him your eved, the eved goes free because you forfeited him to an oved kolchavim. The question is, but what other option did you have? The other option you had is you could have appeased the sheriff with other assets, and you chose the eved kanani, so therefore we penalize you. Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah machru l'shloshim yom mahu. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks another question. What would be the law if you but lease your oved kolchavim, your eved kanani to a goy? What would be the law? Is that tantamount to obligating you to free him at that point? So Tashma Damar Rav Hamocher Abdullah Parhanago v'Kolchavim Yetzi Lacherus. So look at what Rav had said, that if you give him over to the sheriff, he immediately goes free. Now the assumption is that you give him over to pay back a debt for a finite period of time, and then you get the eved back. So isn't that a proof that if even selling him leasing him for a certain period is the penalty applies? No, the Gemara says Hasim v'Parhanago v'Kolchavim she'eno choseres. There it's talking about a Gentile sheriff who is going to keep the eved permanently, and that's the reason why you have to free the eved. Next, Machro chutz mimalachto mahu, chutz min mitzvos mahu. The Gemara is going to ask a series of questions. What if you sell your eved to a goy, but you make certain stipulations? First, let's say first example is you say, I'm selling this eved to you, but you can't use him for work. You can only use him, what they call as a stud, meaning you can use him to sire children for your shvachos, but you cannot work him. Now here, one could argue that the basis for the penalty no longer applies, because what's the penalty based on? It's because you sold him to an oved kolchavim, you're depriving him of his opportunity to do mitzvahs. But here, he'll be a man of leisure. He's only being used to sire children. So he can be Shomer Shabbos, he can be Shomer Yantif, he doesn't have to, he's not forced to work. Right? It's a pretty good life. So then chutz min mitzvos mahu. What if you say that I hereby give you my eved kanani, however you have to permit him to do mitzvahs. That's part of the stipulation. Or chutz mi shabbos v'yamim tovim mahu. Or let's say you say I'm willing to sell him to you, but you have to give him off on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Right? So in all of those situations, does the penalty apply? Leger Toshav Liyisrael Mumer Mahu. Another question. What if you sell him to a Gentile who observes Shiva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach? So there's not going to be any Avodah Zarah, but you still will be making him work on Shabbos and Yom Tov, because a Ger Toshav works on Shabbos, but he doesn't worship Avodah Zarah. Or what if you sell him to a Yisrael Mumer, who also may not be Oved Avodah Zarah, but he's not going to be observing other mitzvahs. He won't be observing Shabbos. L'kusi ma'u. What if you sell him to a kusi, who's not going to be observing the mitzvahs properly, but he'll be observing some mitzvahs? So pshot mi'achada. So the Gemara says we can't answer all of these questions, but one of them we can answer. Ger toishav harehu ka'ovi kolchavim v'ka'ovi kolchavim. That there's a brisa that says that a ger toishav vis-a-vis this law has the same status of an ovei kolchavim, and therefore if you sell the eved to him, the eved goes free. Kusi v'Yisrael mumer amri la kovei kolchavim v'amri la k'Yisrael. And as far as a kusi, a Samaritan, and a Yisrael who's a mumer, not completely shomer mitzvahs, some say that he has the din of an ovei kolchavim and the eved goes free. Some say that he has the status of a Yisrael, and therefore he does not go free. Ba'u minei me Rabbi Ami. Evet shehipal atzma legayasus vein Rabbi Yochel hotzi lo b'din Israel v'lo b'dinei ovdei kol chavim mahu sheyitol isdama. Here's the next question. An Evet Kanani goes to a local enlisting office for the militia, and he goes in and he enlists into the Russian army. Let's say now you go into the Russian army, you're there for 25 years. How many years is it?
25.
25 years. So there's no way by law that the Jew is able to retrieve the Evet back, neither using Jewish law nor using Gentile law. But the army says, listen, we're not going to just we want to be just, and so we will pay you for the Evet. Is the Jew allowed to take the compensation? Now here, understand that the Jew has not sold his Evet voluntarily. So his argument is, let me at least take compensation. I didn't do anything wrong. Let me be compensated for the loss of my asset. On the other hand, you could argue, no, it's not so kosher, because if we let you take compensation for this Evet, that might be an incentive in the future to actually outright sell your avodim, because now you've got the taste of money.
He ran away.
He basically, he didn't run away completely. He just said, I'm going to go buy some groceries for you. Then he went next door and enlisted in the army. And now the Evet says, I'm sorry, master, I have to join the army. I'm not running away, but they're forcing me. I can't work for you anymore. So he has run away in effect, right? So Amarle Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zreika poke ayin b'mechiltech. So Rabbi Yirmiyah told Rabbi Zreika, if you want to know the answer, go look in the Mishnayos and see through your learning if you can find an answer. Nafak dak ve'ashkach the Tanya. So he went and he was able to analyze looking at certain brises, and he found a brisa. Hamocher beisa la'ovik kolchavim dama vasurim va'ovik kolchavim shanas beiso shel Yisrael ve'ein balav ve'ein ba'alav yachal hotzi lo b'dina yisov lo b'dina ovdei kolchavim muter litol isdamav ve'kosev umalo be'erko shelahen mipnei shuhu kematzl miyadam. So the brisa says like this: if a person illicitly sells his house in Eretz Yisrael to a Gentile, you're in violation of the Torah, because the Torah says you're not allowed to sell real estate in Eretz Yisrael to a Gentile. If you do that, so then dama vasurim, the money, the proceeds that you get, have to be forfeited. You're not allowed to benefit from that money. But what happens if an oived kolchavim forcibly coerces you to sell him your house? So are you allowed to take payment for that? So the answer is yes, you're allowed to take payment. And not only that, but you can write the what they call the tabo in Israel, the registry of transfer of sale. You can even record it with the government to say that the property has been sold, and then take compensation for it. Why? Because in this way, at least you're retrieving some asset that would normally otherwise be in the hands of the Oved Chavim, and you can at least get the money from him. So what you see from here is that yes, it's permitted when you're under coercion like that. When the Evet goes and enlists in the army, you can be compensated by the army for the Evet. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a raya. The deal mahani mili bias the kaven de lo sagi le below bias lo asilizvune. Aval abda de sagi le below abda asilizvune. Olo. The Gemara says that may not be an apt analogy. It says, in that situation where a house you're coerced to sell your house, maybe the rabbis had no problem with you taking compensation, because we're not concerned that maybe in the future you're going to sell your next house to a goy. Why? Because everyone needs a house to live in. It's much less likely that you're going to be flipping houses that you need to live in to Gentiles, because you need a house to live in. But when it comes to servants, a servant is not a necessary commodity. So therefore, if we allow you to take compensation for this Evet that enlisted in the militia, you may be tempted to take your other avodim and sell them to Gentiles, because you can live without them. So therefore, if you're going to be downsizing and you want to get cash, so that'll be an incentive for you to sell your avodim to Ovdei Kolchavim. So therefore, we're not sure whether that's an apt analogy or not. So what's the psak? Shalach luhu Rabbi Ami. So Rabbi Ami sent out a psak as follows: Mini Ami bar Nosan Torah Yotze l'chol Yisrael. I hereby pronounce Ami bar Nosan. I hereby pronounce this is a psak halacha for all of Klal Yisrael. Evet shehipol atzmo legayosos. Ve'ein rabbo yochol lahotzia lo b'dinei Yisrael v'lo b'dinei avdei kolchavim mutar litol esdamav v'chosev umala be'erkoshel avdei kolchavim b'nei shuhu kematzel miyadam. He says it's fine. It's fine for a Jew to take payment. only in a situation where you cannot retrieve the Eved either by Jewish or secular law, and you can even record the sale and take compensation for it, because at least you're retrieving some assets from the Oved Kochavim for yourself. And so therefore he paskin that it is analogous to the case of selling a house in Eretz Yisrael. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Hamocher Avda Oved Kochavim konsim oso admeya bedamav. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is quoted as saying that if a person sells his eved to a oved kochavim, like Rashi had foreshadowed in the Mishnah, part of this din that the eved goes free is that we coerce the Jewish master to purchase him back from the oved kochavim. And not only that, but even if you have to pay 100 times his value in order to get him back, we coerce you to do that. So the question is, dafka or lav dafka? So this statement sounds exaggerative. It sounds like hyperbole. Is this literally meant to 100, that the Beis Din can actually, if the Gentile says, I paid 1,000, but I'm not going to give him to you unless you give me $100,000, is that what we're saying? Or is it just an exaggeration, and really it just means that the Beis Din at their discretion will tell the guy to pay more than the Eved is worth? So Tashma, the Amar Reish Lakish, Hamocher Behema Gas Lo Oved Kochavim, Konsim Oso Ad Asara B'Domea. So look at the Brisa. Reish Lakish says that if you sell a behema gasa, now here there's a prohibition that's discussed in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that you're not allowed to sell a behema gasa, like a cow or a bull, to an oved kochavim. The reason why you're not allowed to do that is because it's going to be maras ayin. People will see the old Bessie, the cow that the Jew used to own. They're going to think it belongs to the Jew, and here they see that the cow is schlepping on Shabbos and is doing other forbidden acts. And so therefore the rabbis put a ban on it. And if you do, so what do we say? We force you to redeem it from an oved kochavim, and you have to pay up until 10 times. Up until 10 times. So the Gemara wants to suggest or infer from here that it really is an exaggerative term, because we see that we're not being precise. Sometimes we say 100, sometimes we say 10 times. So it's not to be taken literally. You see that sometimes, in other words, it's not. It's really at the discretion of the Beis Din, but 100 is an exaggeration. So the Gemara says, no, not necessarily so. V'dilma shayni eved d'chol yoma v'yoma mafka le'mi mitzvos. Not necessarily. Maybe 100 is dafka and 10 is dafka. Why then do we make you pay 100 times for an eved and only 10 times for when you sell a behema gasa, a cow, to an oved kochavim? The answer is because your offense is more egregious when you sell the eved kanani, because every day that he's in the possession of the oved kochavim, he can't do mitzvahs. A cow, you can't say that. A cow's not chayiv in mitzvahs. So therefore, just because he's in the possession of an kochavim, is no one's deprived of doing mitzvahs. And that's why maybe you could argue that 100 is dafka and 10 is dafka. The ika da amri amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi hamocher avda lo oved kochavim konsen oso ad asara bedamav. Some learn the whole discussion just the opposite. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was quoted as saying that if you sell your eved to an oved kochavim, we penalize you up till 10 times the value to redeem him back. So the question is, dafka or lav dafka? Is that literally up to 10, or is that just an exaggeration? Tashma, the Amar Reish Lakish, hamocher behema gas lo v'kochavim konsen oso admeya b'domea. So take a look. Reish Lakish says that when you sell a cow to an oved kochavim, you have to buy him back up to 100 times the value. So you see that 110 are indiscriminate numbers. They're used just for exaggerative purposes. The Gemara says, no. Shiny eved de lo haderle. So the Gemara says, no, maybe the reason why we're not as punitive with you when you sell your eved is because since you're not going to be able to retrieve the eved after you redeem him, we're not going to make you pay that much. But with a cow, once you buy him back from the oved kochavim, at least you'll get to use the cow. So therefore we make you pay back even more, up to 100 times. So the Gemara says, Ela behema tamamai mishum dahadrulei liknasei tfeichad. So the Gemara says, but the math doesn't work out. You're telling me that you penalize for selling an eved only 10 times because you're not going to get the use of that eved. But when you sell a cow, you have to pay back up to 100 times because you're going to get the use back of the cow. So only to say that you penalize them up to 11 times because you're only getting one cow back. You're not getting 90 cows back. So therefore, the math doesn't work out. If you want to be commensurate and say that this is an equivalent amount of penalty, you should have said 10 times up till 10 times for the Eved Kanani and up to 11 times for the behemoth, since you're getting the behemoth's use back. So the Gemara says, Ela Eved milsa de lo shchicha lo gazru barabanan. So the Gemara says, no, you could still say that the amount of 10 versus 100 is literal, that we penalize you up to 100 times. Why? Because people are much more likely to sell cows to Gentiles than they are to sell Eved Kananis to Gentiles. And because of that, we have to create a higher bar of penalty if you sell a cow to a Gentile, because we want to make sure you're not going to do it, even though the temptation is great and the opportunities are much more prevalent. But when it comes to selling an Eved Kanani, there's not as much opportunity, there's not as much likelihood that you're going to be incentivized to do it. So if you do it, we don't penalize you to the same level that we penalize you for selling a Behema Gasa. Ba'amine Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Asi. So now the next question is, what if a person sells his Eved? Now we know if you sell your Eved to an Oved Kolchavim, what's the halacha? We penalize you and force you to buy him back from the Oved Kolchavim. What happens if the seller dies before he has a chance to do it? His son inherits his estate. Do we require the son to buy the Eved Kanani back? So imtim salomar tsaram ozen bechor umeis kansu beno acharav mishum disur deraisi aval hacha isur derabana. And don't try to create an analogy to the following case. And the case is, we know that there's a law that when you have a firstborn animal, you have to present it to the Kohen. The Kohen takes this animal, it belongs to him. He has to bring it as a korban to the temple, and he gets to use the rest of the animal for personal use. So the thing is like this, but that's only if the animal does not have a mum. If the animal has a mum, then the Kohen can just slaughter the animal outright, doesn't have to schlep it up to Yerushalayim, etc. Now the law is like this. What if the Kohen deliberately inflicts a mum on the animal so as to avoid having to schlep it up to Yerushalayim and bring it as a korban? So that's a big no-no. You're not allowed to inflict a mum in Kachim, and if he does so, we penalize him and we confiscate, he has to forfeit the animal. And he has to pay the temple the value of the animal. So the question is like this. What happens if the Kohen inflicted the mum, and before we could collect that penalty from him, the Kohen dies? Do we require the son to pay from the assets of the father? So you would say, well, that's a comparable shaila. Maybe you'll say in that case, yeah, you require the son to pay the penalty, but even if you're going to paskin that way over there, you cannot analogize from that case to this case. Because in that case, the father committed an isser de oraisa of inflicting a mum on kachim. Here, the father only did an isser de rabbanan of selling the Eved Kanani to an Oved Kolchavim. So maybe we wouldn't be as punitive to the son. And ve'imtim salomar kevin malachto b'moed umeis lo kansu b'no acher of mishum delo avadisura hachamai. Now let's look at a third example of where there's a penalty imposed on the person. There's a halacha as follows. A person is not allowed to do malacha on Chol HaMoed, right? What's the exception of when are you allowed to do malacha on Chol HaMoed? For a davar ha'aved, when there's a hefsid mammon, exactly. Now let's look at the following situation.
Loss of money.
A loss of money. When you stand to lose money by not doing work. Let's say a person, for example, is in the process of preparing a vat of fermenting grapes for wine. And in the fermentation process, you need to do certain work for it. Otherwise, and if you don't do it by a certain date, the wine will go bad and you'll lose your investment. It's a large amount of grapes. So then we would permit you to work on Chol HaMoed to save the grapes. But what happens if a person times it deliberately in such a way? He says, you know what? I can always make this wine whenever I want. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start the fermentation process on Erev Yontif, such that I can always claim, well, if I don't finish it on Chol HaMoed, it's going to be your davar ha'aved. So the Chachamim were wise to such a ruse, because basically you time it so that it will become a davar ha'aved during Chol HaMoed, and they said that no, we penalize you and we force you to forfeit the wine, and you can't work in that situation. Now, there too, what if the person who set up the wine fermentation process on Erev Yontif dies? Do we penalize the son as well? So even if you're going to paskin over there that we don't penalize the son, you still can't analogize that to our shaila. Because in that situation, the father didn't actually commit any isser at all. He just did something that was sneaky. But you can't say that he violated either a deoraisa or a derabanan. And therefore, if we don't penalize the son in that case, maybe it's because the father didn't do something that was so egregious. But in our case, where the father went ahead and violated an Isser D'Rabbanan of selling an Eved Kanani to an Oved Kochavim, maybe we would be more punitive on the son. So the question therefore is, my L'didei kansu Rabbanan v'halese, o dilma lemamoni kansu Rabbanan v'ha'ise. Do we say that we penalize the man, and the man is no longer alive, and therefore his son does not have to resume the penalty, or assume the penalty? Or do we say, no, we penalize the man's asset, and if the asset is still in its present state, either that he sold it to an Oved Kochavim and the asset is still present, then we penalize the son and force him to redeem the Eved.
So if the Oved Kochavim guy would have killed the animal, that would have been the end of the story? Or the fact it was still alive, that's why we can penalize him? Let's say it was 20 years before. Does it make a difference? Like,
oh, you mean in case of selling the behema gasa? Because we're not really talking about the case of the behema gasa anymore. The three cases
in that case where he sells it to a guy,
yeah,
you penalize the heirs. Like, is there a time frame involved in this?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a time frame. It would presumably there is no time frame. No matter how long ago you sold it, you have to buy it back because you violated a takanas chachamim. We constantly you have to buy it back. Okay, we don't see it from the Gemara. There's any expiration date. So Amar Leitinisuha. So he said back to him to answer this question as far as whether we penalize the son or not. He says, let's look at a brisa. Sadar sheniskavtsa b'shvias tizar lemotzoi shvias nitaiva unidaira lo tizar lemotzoi shvias. We know that you're not allowed to work your property during a Shemitah year. Now, midioraisa, the only prohibition is to do land improvement during Shemitah. But what if you just want to remove weeds? Are you allowed to remove weeds during Shemitah year? Midioraisa, the answer is yes. But midirabanan, the rabbis forbade even the removing of thorns and weeds from the field during the Shemitah year. So let's say a field had its weeds removed, so there's only a rabbinic violation. So the halacha is tizara lemotzoi shvius. You're allowed to plant on it during the 8th year because there was no isser dioraisa performed with this field. However, if the field actually had an isser dioraisa, let's say you went and fertilized the field, or you dragged, you had an animal plow over it and fertilize it. So in those situations, we penalize you, and we do not allow you to work it on the 8th year. Ba'amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina naktinan hetiva umeis beno zora. However, nonetheless, if a person did do land improvements during Shemitah, and then the owner dies and it gets passed over to his son, we don't penalize the son. The penalty doesn't carry over to the son. The son can now continue working it. So we see that we only penalize the man himself, we don't penalize his son. Amar Abaye naktinen, timei taharo shel chaveru umeis lo kansu rabbanan beno acharav. Another related halacha is, we know that there's a halacha that if I damage your property, I have to pay for it. What happens if I damage your property in such a way that it's what's called hezek she'eno nikar? It's not recognizable physical damage, but it's existential damage. So for example, you had food that was tohar. I took a sheretz and I exposed it and made it tameh. Let's say now it's not usable because it was kachim in some way. I've caused you a discrete and concrete financial loss. But since it's not physically recognizable, I'm not held liable to pay. I'm chayiv bidei shamayim. God holds me liable, but I can't be penalized and based to pay. If, however, the chachamim at their discretion will many times, if it's done deliberately, will penalize the person and say, even though midioraisa you're not chayiv to pay, we will force you to pay anyway. So that penalty in this situation, what happens if the person who was holding the sheretz dies and his son now is only alive? Do we penalize the son, just like we were ready to penalize the father? So the answer is no, we don't penalize the son. My time hezek sheinu nikr lo shmei hezek uknasa de rabbanon he l'didei kansu rabbanon librelo kansu rabbanon. Exactly as I spoke it out. It's hezek sheinu nikr midiraisa you're not chayiv to pay. Only midirabbanon are we mechayiv you to pay, and therefore. We only penalize the father, we don't penalize the son. Okay. O l'chutza la'aretz, if a person were to go ahead and to sell the eved to a Jew outside of Eretz Yisrael, we said the halacha is the eved goes free. Now, who is now responsible for freeing the eved? So Tanu Rabbanan, hamocher avdul l'chutz la'aretz yetze l'cheres v'sarke et shichur me rabo sheni. It's the buyer. The buyer who, let's say, lives in Bavel, he is now legally the owner of that eved, but we require him to emancipate the eved. So really, the sale is legal. Technically, the sale is legal, but because it was done improperly, the buyer has to free him. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, Pa'amim yetze upamim lo yetze, ketzad. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel continues in this price and he says, it's not so simple. Just because an eved was sold to Chutz doesn't always mean that he's going to go free. Let's explain. So, Omar Ploni, Avdi Michartihu li Ploni Antochi lo yetze. Le Antochi shiva Antochia yetze. So it depends. If a seller who lives in Eretz Yisrael says, I am hereby selling my slave to an Antiochi, a Jew from Antioch, so in that situation, the eved has not been sold necessarily to a Jew who lives in Chutz La'aretz, even though Antioch is, let's say, in Turkey or Syria, but it's a town that is outside of Eretz Yisrael. But by saying that I've sold it to a person from Antioch does not mean that the Jew currently resides in Antioch. It means, just like you say, you ask an Israeli, what kind of Jew are you? He says, I'm a Turkish Jew. I'm an Iraqi Jew. It doesn't mean he currently lives in Turkey or Iraq. It means that's where he comes from originally. So therefore, it's the same thing over here. He's saying, I'm selling it to a Jew from Antioch, but he lives in Yerushalayim. So therefore, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing illicit about that sale, and the eved doesn't go free. If later on the eved is taken to Chutz La'aretz, so then you have to assess. But the sale itself is not a sale that invalidates that makes the eved go free. But if the bill of sale says, I hereby have sold my eved to an Antiochi Jew who lives in Antioch, so then clearly it's a sale to Chutz La'aretz, and that in itself is grounds for the eved to go free. So frak the Gemara v'hatanya mechartiu la'antochi yetze la'antochi hashori belod lo yetze. But this brisa seems to contradict, because this brisa says that if you just say stam, I sell my eved to an Antiochi Jew, the eved goes free. But if you say that I sell a slave to an Antiochi Jew who resides in Lod, and you specify that he lives currently in Eretz Yisrael, only there does the eved not go free through the sale. So the Gemara says, Lo kasha ha isle beisa be'eretz Yisrael ha isle ushpiza be'eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara answers, it depends. You look at this Jew who was the buyer. Does he own a house in Eretz Yisrael? If yes, then he's considered to be a resident of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore the sale from the seller to the buyer does not automatically create grounds for the eved to go free. But if the Antiochi Jew does not own a house in Eretz Yisrael, but he's staying at a hotel, so then that automatically is grounds for the eved to go free by saying that I'm selling it to an Antiochi Jew. In other words, it's clear that both the buyer and the seller have knowledge that this eved is going to be taken out of Eretz Yisrael through the sale, and therefore the penalty is that the eved has to be liberated. Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Babel shenasi isha be'eretz Yisrael v'ichnisa lo avoda mushpachos v'daito lachser mahu. So now here's another interesting question having to do with the laws of finances in marriage. A woman lives in Eretz Yisrael and she marries a Babylonian Jew. And the law is, he tells his wife, you know what, sweetheart, we're going to live first in Bavel and eventually we'll make our way back to Eretz Yisrael. She brings servants with her that she had owned previously, and the law is, this is called Nichsei Tzon Barzel. These are assets, not real estate, but assets that are recorded in the ketubah. Their value is recorded in the ketubah. So upon termination of the marriage, either through divorce or death, the husband has to pay out the value of these servants or give back the servants to the wife. Okay, so now the question is, do we view him now as the owner of the slaves? And since he's a Babylonian Jew, this is viewed as a sale from an Eretz Yisrael Jew, the wife, to a Chutz La'aretz Jew, and the Eved now goes free? Or do we say that since she still technically is the owner of the Eved, this is not a sale that is being recorded, and since the plan is for them to eventually go back, the Eved does not have to be liberated. So, and the Gemara now says, Tiboy lamando Omar Hadin Ima, Tiboy lamando Omar Hadin Imo. Now, there's a machlokis in the Gemara in Ksuvos as to the status of Nichsei Tzom Barzel upon termination of marriage. Let's say a man and a woman get divorced, and she says, well, I brought in the beautiful break front piece of furniture, and it's worth $5,000, and I would like to get it back. And the husband says, well, I know we recorded that it's worth $5,000, but I've become very attached to that piece of furniture. I'm going to keep the furniture, and I'll write you a check for $5,000. There's a machlokas in the Gemara in Ksuvos, who has the rights to demand the actual original furniture back. Does the woman have a right because she can argue it's what's called Shevach Beis Aviha, it's a family heirloom, I brought it in and I expect it back? Or does the man have more rights to say, I'm going to keep it because since I was financially liable I was financially liable to give you back $5,000 no matter what happened. Let's say, our house would have gotten hit by an earthquake and the break front would have been demolished. The law would have been, I still would have to give you $5,000 for what it was worth when you brought it in, and therefore it's almost like it's mine. So who is correct? So the Gemara says, regardless of how you resolve that, what side you take in that machlokes, our question is still a question: is this Eved considered to be the woman's property or is it the man's property? Tiboy laman do amar hadin ima, kaven da hadin ima kidida damu, o dilma kaven de mishamdi le lepera kididei damu. So if you look at it as the law is with her, that she can demand her chattel back in its original form, and she can force the husband to say, don't give me cash, but give me the original object back. So, of course, the question is, on the one hand, we could say that the slaves really belong to her, because upon termination of the marriage, she gets the slaves back, and therefore it's not like a sale to a Chutz La'aretz Jew. Or on the other hand, you could say, no, since the husband has rights to enslave and to utilize their labor, they belong to him, and therefore it is like a sale from an Eretz Yisrael Jew to a Chutz La'aretz Jew. Viti boy laman do amar hadini mo, keven da hadini mo kididei damo, odilma keven de lokani le lagufe kidida damo. And even if you learn that in this case of the break front, the husband gets to keep the break front and the husband gets to keep the slaves, so therefore certainly you could argue that it's like a sale, that she's sort of given over, transferred ownership from herself to her husband, and therefore the slave should be liberated because it's been transferred from an Eretz Yisrael Jew to a Chutz La'aretz Jew. On the other hand, you could say no, that since the husband doesn't own the bodies of the slaves that she brings into the marriage, but only owns their labor, maybe it's not a transfer of sale. And the Gemara therefore says, Teku, we're going to have to let that sit. We don't have a resolution. Finally, Amar Rabbi Vohu, Shanali Rabbi Yochanan, Eved sheyatza achar Rabbo l'Surya, umachro sham Rabbo, yetze lecherus. Rabbi Yochanan is quoted as saying that if an Eved voluntarily follows his master out to Syria, which for these purposes is considered to be Chutz La'aretz, and then his master sells him to a Syrian Jew who lives outside of Israel, there is no penalty placed upon the master, and the Eved does not have to be liberated. In other words, the Syrian Jew who bought him is allowed to keep him. We do not coerce him to liberate the Eved. Now, why is that? Because since the Eved voluntarily left, the master did not require the Eved to leave. The master said, I'm going to take a trip to Syria. You're welcome to come. You don't have to come. The fact that the Eved voluntarily left means that he forfeited his rights to be liberated upon his sale into a Chutz La'aretz Jew. So, the Gemara v'hatani Rabbi Chia ibed Zechuso. But one second, didn't Rabbi Chia say that I'm sorry. The first statement of Rabbi Yochanan's quote is saying is that the Eved is freed. Rabbi Chia says no, the Eved is not freed. He loses his rights to be freed. So lo kasha kan shedas rabo lachzor kan she'ein das rabo lachzor. So the Gemara says it's not a contradiction. When the master says I'm going to Syria and then I'm coming back, the Eved says okay, I'll go with you. In that situation, the Eved is anticipating that this is a short trip. He doesn't want to live in Chutz La'aretz, and therefore, just because he's sold doesn't deprive him of the rights to be liberated because he wants to live in Eretz Yisrael. But in a situation where the master says, I'm moving permanently to Syria, do you want to join me? And the Eved says yes, so then if the master sells him afterwards, the Eved has forfeited his rights to be liberated because he voluntarily placed himself in Chutz La'aretz permanently. Vehatanya, and here's a brisa to support that. Yotzei ha'eved acha rabo l'Surya. So the brisa starts first off by saying something bizarre. It says that if a master goes out to Syria, the Eved is required to follow him. So the Gemara interjects and it says, Yotze, lo sagi de lo nafik. What do you mean? The Eved is obligated to follow his master to Syria? V'hatanan, look at the Mishnah in Ksuvas. Ve'ein hakol motziin. So that you cannot coerce an Eved to leave Eretz Yisrael. So how can you tell me that an Eved has to follow his master? So the answer is you're reading the brisa wrong. It rather reads, Ela yatsa ha'eved, acha rabo l'Surya, umacha rabo sham. But if the Eved does follow, not that he's forced to follow, if he did follow his master voluntarily to Chutz La'aretz, im das rabo lachzor kofenoso, vim ein das rabo lachzor ein kofenoso. If the master has intentions of returning and decides instead to sell his Eved without taking him back, we coerce the buyer to liberate the Eved. If, however, the master moved permanently and made that disclosure to the Eved, I'm moving permanently to Chutz La'aretz, and then he sells him, the Eved has forfeited his rights to be liberated. Amar Rav Anan shamis minei demar Shmuel tarti chadahach v'idach v'itmar. He says, I heard two halachas from Shmuel. One is this law that if the Eved voluntarily goes with his master to Chutz La'aretz, he forfeits his right to be liberated. And I heard another halacha from Shmuel, which was Hamocher Sadeu Bishnas Hayovel Atzma, Rav Omar Mechura Viyotza, Ushmuel Omar Eina Mechura Kol Iker. That there's a machlokes. We know that if a person sells property before Yovel, then the halacha is that upon the arrival of Yovel, the land reverts back to the seller. What happens if a person sells property during the Yovel year itself? So there's a machlokus between Rav and Shmuel. Effectively, they both agree that the property goes back to the seller automatically. The question is there a sale or not? Rav says there's a sale, but immediately the sale reverses. Shmuel says there's no sale whatsoever. It's a completely meaningless act. Now, what does that mean? What's the difference practically between Rav and Shmuel? We know that there's a principle called kinyan agav. If I want to sell you chattel, so one of the ways for me to sell you chattel is if I'm selling you real estate anyway, I can throw in property, chattel that's resting on the real estate, and you acquire the chattel via the real estate. According to Rav, even though I have to return the property immediately back to you, but I can still acquire the chattel that I've acquired concomitant with the real estate. But according to Shmuel, since there's been no sale whatsoever, not only do I not acquire the real estate, I haven't acquired the chattel either.